Welcome back. We're going to take a look at another climbing knot today. This is a super useful climbing knot to use at the top of a climb when you're attaching an extension to get your master point down below a lip that might be sharp, so you don't want your dynamic rope to be running over it. It's also a great way to attach yourself at the top of a multi-pitch climb on a natural feature like a tree or a boulder. You probably guessed it, but this is the bowline. So the bowline knot we're going to start with is a simple bowline. We're going to grab just one end of the rope, just like so, and we're going to pass it around our object, in this case a tree. So I'm going to start on the left and then go to my right. You can also start on your right and go to the left, works the same way, but just for clarity. Okay. And now I've got my two strands. I'm going to identify my load strand. So this is going to be my load strand here in my left hand. And in my load strand, I want to make a loop. Okay, so just bending the rope into a loop. And the way you make this loop matters. The way I've made this loop is so that the load strand here, when I make the loop, goes behind the standing end of the rope. Okay, so one more time. Load strand here, I make a bend of rope. So the load strand, you can see on that loop, is behind or toward my anchor relative to the standing end of rope. This would be correct. This would be incorrect right here where my load strand is on the outside. Okay, so you want to trap the load strand between the anchor and the standing end of your rope, like so. Okay, and now the rest of this knot is very simple, and if you overcomplicate it, it's easy to mess it up. I'm going to pass the tail of the rope through this, around the back side of my load strand, and then passing it through. So there will be a U shape around my load strand. So take the tail of the rope, pass it through, and then I'm going to make that U right around here, just like this. Pull it until I get the tension that I want, and then I pass the tail through. So you can see this tongue or U around, and there shouldn't be any twists in that when I go through, okay? And I started on one side and I kept it on that side before passing it over. I don't want to cross it over like this and then pass it through and around, okay? So I keep it on the same side, around, and then back up and through. And then to pull this hitch tight, or excuse me, this knot tight, I grab the tail and I pull the tail at the same time as I pull the load strand. So tail, load strand, pull them both, and that cinches it up nice and tight. So that's the simple bowline. One of the dangers of the bowline is that there's cyclical loading where it becomes tight then loose and tight then loose, like this, then you can see that it starts to loosen up on itself. Okay, so, and gradually you can see it starts to work its way out. So to prevent that from happening, we want to make sure that we have enough tail, which is this side of the rope, to make a barrel knot. Okay, so I'm going to make a barrel knot on this leg. And a barrel knot, you can take a look at our overhand knots video, see how to make a barrel knot. It's in the overhand knot family, but essentially I make two loops that make an X over each other, and I pass the tail through. And then I cinch that down nice and tight, like so, making sure that that barrel knot butts up right against the other part of the knot. And now with cyclical loading here, you can see there's little to no movement. Okay, we're going to take a look at another bowline now. It's going to be very similar to the simple bowline that we just did, but we're going to add one more component to make it a little bit more resistant to cyclical loading. This is sometimes called the improved bowline, and it has one extra loop in it. So first, I didn't mention this when we were talking about the simple bowline, but most of the time when you're building an anchor, you're going to want to sling at the very, very bottom of the particular anchor so that when that object is under load, or when the rope goes under load, when it's encircling the object, if the force is pulling it down, it doesn't slide down under load. If you sling low, sling it right at the bottom. Then when it's under load, there's nowhere for it to go, and so it's much more secure. The only time you might want to go high is, say you have a significant branch on a tree coming out and you want to go up and around that branch, and there's no way that it can get pulled down and start to slide along, because if it does slide along, sometimes you could damage the material that your anchor is made out of. Okay, so same start as the simple bowline. I'm simply going to pass this tail around the tree. Okay. And also, just like the simple bowline, I'm going to start by making a loop with the load strand behind. And now here we're going to change one thing. I'm going to grab the load strand again and make another loop in exactly the same way so the load strand comes behind. Okay, so let's see that one more time here. So I make a loop so the load strand is behind, grab further down on the load strand and make another loop so the load strand is behind, and I underlap that so that the second loop is behind the first loop, and then I take the tail and I pass that through both loops now, and then I make that same U or tongue around. I like to get this up pretty close to the tree, like this, okay, when I do it. I didn't demonstrate it so well in the simple bowline because I was trying to be clear by having it pulled away. I'm going to pass that tail through, just like so. Again, to tighten, I pull both on the tail and on the load strand here. Okay, and this has one additional step to tightening, which is to pull on the opposite side here. So I pull that down, and now you can see I end up with these two. I'm also going to put a barrel knot on, but just to show, this, you can see, is also not quite as prone to cyclical loading here, pulling back and forth. You can see there's not really that much movement in the initial loop. It's mostly affecting the secondary loop. Okay, and then I'll put that barrel knot on, like so, and push that tail through, making sure the barrel knot is butted up nice and against the original two loops. And then from the top, you can see I end up with 1, 2, 3, 4 nice parallel loops of rope. This final bowline that I'd like to show is a double bowline. And just like the name implies, we're going to use 2 strands of rope to do it. And generally, it's done with some part of the middle of the rope. It's a pretty common technique to use if you happen to be tied in to one side. You might grab a big bite and pass it around something like a tree or a boulder. Or it's also a common technique to use in a single pitch environment if you're building one bomber anchor from the top and you want 2 strands of rope to compose your top rope anchor. So here I have my bite or bend of rope somewhere in the middle of the rope, and I'm going to pass that around. Sling it nice and low. And you're going to need just about the same amount of rope as you would for a simple bowline. And essentially what you're doing with this double bowline is you're tying a simple bowline, but just using 2 strands of rope in each hand. So 1, 2, 1, and 2. Okay, I'll pull out a little more slack here so I'll have enough room to do my barrel knot back up at the end. Looks pretty good. And now, just like before, treating these 2 ropes as if they're one rope, I push that underneath. Okay, so here you can clearly see that's the load strand, or in this case, the load strands, and they are behind. And then I pass my tail here, which in this case is simply a bend of rope, through that. Get it nice and close to my anchor, and then I'm going to make that U underneath. Pass it back through both strands. And this barrel knot here, I'm going to do on these 2 strands here. Okay, so I'll get that nice and organized. Okay, and now I'll use this to make my barrel knot. So go around like so. That's once. And then make my second barrel knot here, or second part of the barrel knot, and then pass the end underneath. And then when I pull that down, I'm going to pull this strand and this strand both. And now you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 parallel strands.